get a copy of. Awesome. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christine Batten, Membership Coordinator with Community Sector Network of Prince Edward Island, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for our You're the Expert series. I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that the land upon which we gather is unceded Mi'kmaq territory. At Prince Edward Island, Mi'kmaq is covered by the historic treaties of peace and friendship. We pay our respects to the Indigenous Mi'kmaq people who have occupied this island for over 12,000 years, past, present, and future. So we will be recording this session just to let folks know. So today we're joined by Jennifer, and she owns JSD HR Consulting. And this is her second session with us, so we're glad to have her back. Our topic today is leadership transitions and succession planning. And I know this is an introductory guide, but it is an important topic. I've come across it several times in my travels, speaking with other nonprofits about what happens at the top of a leadership role when things go sideways. And it could be somebody retires, could be somebody gets unexpectedly sick, it could be a number of things. So Jennifer is going to dive into that for us today. And so I'm going to just hand it over to you, Jennifer, and off you go.
Thanks, Christine. Thanks to everyone for joining. I think we have some people who are from maybe different places outside of PEI. So if you'd like to introduce yourselves in the chat, please go ahead. Before I get started, under the theme of acknowledgements, I just want to acknowledge that I think people in the community sector network lost a dear colleague recently. Amber Jadis is actually the reason I'm here today. I tried to donate this time to her, and she chose to have me donate it to the community sector network so that more people could benefit from my sort of philanthropic time donation. And as a result, Christine and I have now done 2 webinars together for the network, and I think we'll continue to do so for the indefinite future. So I just wanted to say thank you to Amber for getting us all here. And I was just so sad to learn of her passing. She was a dear client of mine for a number of years. So anyways, I think everyone can see my screen. Is the presentation showing for everyone? Just give me a thumbs up.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Wonderful, because it's been up there so long now, I've almost forgotten about it. All right, let's see if my button finger's working. Okay, very good. All right, so this is just a little blurb about me. I'm an HR consultant. Obviously, oops, somebody mute themselves. Natasha, we can hear you.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. I can mute you myself, but I'm not that really adept at managing all of these Zoom features at once, but all good. Thanks for joining us. Okay, I think the most important thing to emphasize about my HR consulting practice is that I work with small businesses that are scaling or sometimes just staying small. So whenever I do something like this, I always try to emphasize what I call the MVP version, which is like the minimum viable product version of HR foundation and concepts, so that it's not like a big, expensive, fancy bells and whistles solution that would only be appropriate for companies with a lot of capital to spend or a huge number of people. So I think that's really where my niche is, and I love working with small business the most. I like being scrappy, resilient, and super savvy and creative about how we spend our HR time, understanding that they just don't have a lot to dedicate to that area typically. By the way, if anyone has any questions at any point, you can put those in the chat, and I think Christine's going to highlight them for me so that I can answer if something comes up through the presentation, but there will also be time for questions at the end. Okay, so basically what we're going to go through today is the very basics of succession planning. This was really designed for people who do not have a plan at all. There's going to be a couple of common concepts I'm going to introduce, critical roles being one of the most important, and then succession planning as a whole, how we manage our internal talent to develop strategies to deal with unexpected vacancies, as well as some expected ones. And then there's a template that I'm going to provide you to start your succession plan. I really toiled with sending it out in advance or sending it out after, and I chose to do it after just so that people aren't in fiddling with it while I'm trying to, to review it, as we all have a tendency to do. But you will be getting an email directly to you, a blank template, including a sample that you can use to start building your own succession plan. So succession planning is something that's become very important in my world for small businesses, because if something were to happen to someone who's in a critical role that really makes things tick where you work, if you don't have a succession plan, your options are basically to come in the following Monday morning, look around the room, and try to point to somebody who's going to take over this critical role in your organization. Understandably, that creates an extreme level of stress. It's not very practical. But I do find that a lot of leaders kind of like to do the ostrich thing where they'll bury their head in the sand around this, just hoping that nothing bad happens. But then occasionally, like, it comes back to you at 3 o'clock in the morning some night while you're trying to sleep. And so that's what we're really trying to avoid. You want to have some kind of plan that's better than the look around the room and point plan. So that's really my goal for today, is to introduce you to how you can start succession planning without it being this huge, overwhelming thing that you just don't want to think about. You can let me know at the end if I've achieved that objective or not. Okay, so again, this is about what do we do when somebody leaves suddenly, or we know they're about to leave, they're going to retire, quit, or win the lottery, and they're not coming back. Either maybe you knew about it, but it was maybe a very short turnaround, you were surprised by the schedule of it, or it just happens and you get no warning whatsoever, and you have to come in and point to somebody. So the risks of not planning are obviously disruption to services or the main functions of the organization, a loss of institutional knowledge, which is really terrifying when that happens, and then decreased client or donor confidence. So one thing I've noticed in the private sector a lot more recently is clients who are maybe signed up for a platform or a SaaS offering or something, and they want to know, like, if something happens to your main developer or software engineer, is this thing I'm paying for still going to work? Because it kind of seems to me like you rely on this one individual for almost everything. And believe it or not, there are clients who are really thinking about that more and more. Maybe they've been burned in the past, but they want to make sure that they're working with companies that are stable. And I'm sure that it is something that's on donors' minds and other people who rely on your services as well. So I was actually kind of surprised when that started coming up. But maybe since COVID, people are more risk averse, or they're more aware that things really unexpected and huge can happen. And so it's become kind of more top of mind for a lot of organizations, I found, which I love because I think it's a really smart and proactive thing to do. So I did a little bit of research. These are US stats, just to be fully transparent, but about 29% of nonprofit organizations actually have a written succession plan, but yet 60% of their CEOs plan to leave in the next 5 years. I think we can acknowledge that there's a math problem here. So there's quite a few people with CEOs or, executive directors, higher level organization leaders who will be leaving, and there's no plan. And these plans aren't something that you can roll out and implement in a couple of weeks. Okay, you're going to see when we get into the planning aspect that it actually takes months, sometimes years, to really proactively plan around a significant departure. And so there's no better time than the present. Again, the main thing we're trying to avoid with this plan is operational disruptions, loss of institutional knowledge, and then that diminished confidence in people who surround your organization. Just pause for a minute. If anyone has any questions, feel free to hop on. Otherwise, we'll just continue to put them in the chat. So far, so good. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so there's a couple types of succession plans. These are in order of sort of how critical they are. So emergency succession for critical roles is the number one. That's the emergency unplanned absence for a critical leadership role. And we'll get more into the definition of critical roles in a minute. And then there's impending succession. So, retirements and things that you can kind of dabble away at. It's not as urgent, but it's certainly really a nice to have because they're coming. You might as well take some steps to minimize the disruption when it happens. And then leadership development succession. This is a little bit of a luxury for a small organization, but if you have some bandwidth to put towards it, it's also really nice to start building that talent funnel from the bottom up. And so that you have a lot of knowledge shared amongst a larger group so that when things happen, you kind of just can go with the flow and it's not a big panic anytime you have turnover. Today, we're mostly going to be focusing on number one. Because again, this is the emergency one. This is the one that you really want to make sure you protect your business against. I should say your organization. Okay. So the basic framework is we identify who the critical roles are. We identify who might be able to fill them. We draft the plan. We map out a timeline for closing gaps that are identified in that plan. And then we regularly review it to make sure it's still current and up to date. There has to be communication around this entire process throughout, or it's really hard to execute on the plan, and it's very hard to get buy-in from the people who are impacted by the plan. So this is just a little reminder that this has to be a very open, transparent, and sort of public process to ensure that it's done properly and that everybody understands why they need to contribute to its success and why it's important for the organization and everyone working in it. Okay, so here's the thing is that sometimes people don't love the idea of you planning around them leaving. So people can feel threatened by that. It's just natural human nature. If they're not familiar with this as a general HR or business concept, they may be like, why are we doing this all of a sudden? They might take it personally. They might be a little bit defensive. They might be resistant to changes. But the truth is that we really need their cooperation in getting this to work. And so it's best if we're able to bring everyone on board so that they understand that this is something that's beneficial to the organization as a whole. It's not something to target specific people. It actually has nothing to do with people at all. It has to do with the roles that make the organization run. It doesn't matter who is in those roles. And so some things you can do is just make sure that, again, you communicate why we're doing this. It's about business continuity, not replacing individuals. Again, it has nothing to do with the person who's in the role. It has to do with the role and its importance to the organization. Highlight that it presents development opportunities for other people in the organization who are potential successors. And just encourage an open conversation and culture around this as a good thing within the organization and very important for the organization's business continuity and therefore the continuity of the services that they provide in the community. Always, we would hope that a leader will be at the top of this, be sort of the executive sponsor for any succession planning that's being done so that, it's just modeling the positive outlook from the top down. Okay, so one concept I don't want to get hung up on because I know we're dealing with small organizations is that, we need to have a successor, like a perfect circle that fits in the hole that's the exact same shape and size, and then we're done. And like, I don't want to talk about this as if that's going to be easy to do. I know it's actually probably impossible in most of your cases. So there's sort of some creative things that you can do if you don't have that one-to-one match of an obvious successor that you're going to move toward filling that role if the need ever arises. So you can sort of break the position up into different parts, splitting the responsibilities. You can use a number of people to fill those gaps. You can sort of build it emphasized on specific critical projects instead of critical roles and kind of work it that way. You can create just a list of industry experts who you might be able to partner with. Just even thinking about that list and who you might go to is a very important part of sort of reducing the stress around this. And you can also just try to foster a culture of entrepreneurial, resilient, resourceful, dig in kind of thinking, where everybody understands that overall we're trying to make this an organization where it's very transparent and there's not just one person who knows how to do everything, but that we all could contribute if there was some kind of emergency. So I think this is a really important thing to acknowledge, just because if your organization is new to this, sometimes it does put people off just a little bit. Okay. Any questions so far? Anything? Everyone good? Okay, I'll just continue on until I hear otherwise. Okay. So again, this is a little bit redundant, but there's an overview of what we're going to do here. We're going to identify critical roles. We're going to identify potential successors. We're going to determine gaps between these two groups. And then we're going to plan on how to close them. And we're going to communicate throughout the building of the plan, the launch of the plan, the starting of the plan, so that we get organizational buy-in into this entire process. So again, the role is what? It's not a person. The role is a what. What do we need to keep the organization running? The successor is a who, and then how and when do we get this who able to do the what?
Jennifer,
Yeah.
is there any capacity in terms of size of organization that this would not apply to? Like, I'm thinking there's quite a few organizations on Prince Edward Island that are 1 or 2 people. What's your
Yeah.
thoughts?
Yeah. So they're going to be really small. And I think it obviously makes it more difficult, but you can do sort of a little bit of a skill and task-based analysis of what it's going to be hard, Christine, to do it completely, but there are still probably reasons to have a plan where you might just, instead of picking one critical role, you might pick critical tasks or projects that you identify that are really critical to continuity. And then you can just work with your one other employee or maybe an external consultant to make sure that you're able to backfill those. Does
Okay.
that answer
Yeah,
your question? Okay.
absolutely. That makes sense for
I
sure.
mean, obviously, the larger the pool you have to pick from, the easier this is. There's no question about that. There's no getting around that. But I think just even thinking about what it would be like if suddenly, if you're the ED and suddenly you can't come in one day, for the good of the organization and the people that you support in that organization, like thinking about, is this just a knowledge management thing where at least I can write down exactly what we do and how we do it, so that when we find a replacement, that's there for them. There are definitely some things you can do even if you're really small. And as I'll talk about later, having some kind of tiny plan is better than no plan at all.
Would there ever be a scenario where a board or the head of the board would get involved in this process?
Absolutely. We're going to use everyone and anyone at our disposal to try to put this together. Absolutely. Anyone who's tied to the organization that is in a position to help should be considered as part of the succession plan. Again, even if it's just the knowledge management piece. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes, certainly, for sure.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Okay. So critical roles are based on not usually what everybody thinks. So a lot of people just think, oh, well, the highest role is the more critical. Sometimes that's true, but it's not always. So critical roles, looking at internal considerations, we would have difficulty delivering on firm commitments without that role. We would be unable to achieve strategic goals without that role. We wouldn't be able to meet regulatory requirements without that role. Some external considerations are the skills are exceptionally rare, or there's a very limited candidate pool, even if it's like worldwide. The role has really high turnover, and so it's hard to keep people in that role just as a factor of the industry it's in or whatever the skills are. And it requires a lot of institutional knowledge, which again goes back to that knowledge management part of succession planning, which is, where is this stuff written down? It can't just be floating in one person's head. But there are exceptions to how much you can write down, and so if it's a role where that institutional knowledge is really, really important to replace in a brain versus on paper, you need to think about that role being more critical. So, and I'm going to give you a checklist on how to determine exactly which roles are critical in the organization, but it's not just a senior position with a high title or status. And it's defined by its impact on the business continuity and strategic goals. So if you can live without them for 2 or 3 months, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about roles that will seriously mess things up if they're vacant for an extended or unplanned period of time. And again, there's a checklist and a scoring tool that I'm going to go through with you later that will help you determine this definitively. So the other thing is, okay, great. We've identified the role. We've identified the what. How do we identify the who? How do we identify who we might move into the role? So you want someone who's obviously already a strong performer and is adaptable. So they're going to be expected to dive in if something goes wrong. There's certain personalities that are great with that, and there's certain ones that are not. And I think this is a really important piece that often gets missed. It's not just about the skills and performance. It's also about their resilience, resourcefulness, and ability and actually desire to want to jump in when there's a crisis. You want technical skills and soft skills like leadership and strategic thinking, because obviously they're going to do better working through the plan. You want to make sure the candidates that you pick align with the organization's values. Consider their readiness and willingness. So if they're like an amazing successor, but they have no desire whatsoever to help out in a situation like that, they're not a great candidate on the whole. And then you want to balance their immediate readiness with the long-term potential for a sustainable succession plan. So back to Christine's question and my challenge always in working with small business, some of these things probably sound a little luxurious when you have 3 or 4 people. So it's just something else to keep in mind. Here in this box, perfection is not the goal. It's continuity and adaptability. So I just don't want everybody to give up and throw their hands up because they have 4 people and this seems utterly ridiculous. Again, even a tiny plan or a tiny piece around knowledge management for some of these critical roles will go a long way to reducing the disruption caused by unexpected absences. Here's some little red flags, people who might not make great successors. They are misaligned with the values of the organization. As an HR person, I'm kind of hoping you don't have any of these, but just sometimes we do. They are high self-focused, so they tend to be more prioritized on their personal career versus the overall success of the organization. They might have some unresolved conflicts or tensions within the team that would prevent them from really successfully elevating into the role that they're the successor for, or they just lack accountability when it comes to high stakes tasks. Just going to take a breath and take a drink of water. Anyone have any questions? My gosh, we're quiet today. Okay. I am here at your disposal. Feel free to ask me anything. Jump in. All right, so I'm going to take you over to the tool, as I'm hoping this link works, or I will have to stop sharing my screen and dig it out of somewhere. And we're going to go through an exercise now to practice all the things that we've just discussed. So Christine, can you see the spreadsheet now?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. So there's quite a lot to this, and I really want to try to make it as not overwhelming as possible. And there's multiple tabs, and some things are carried over between the tabs. So if I'm going too fast or I've confused anyone, please stop me and ask me to repeat what I've just said or better explain how these tabs all work together. Okay. So again, the first thing we have to do is identify our critical roles. This is your identifying critical roles spreadsheet. You put the person's name in here, although you don't have to. Again, it could just be the role because again, it's not about who. So we could actually take that part out, but you're going to put the role in here and you're going to give it a little check for each of these that it meets the criteria. And then you're going to subtotal this section, which is sort of the internal consideration section. Then you're going to go down and you're going to score it in the external consideration section. So these really are about market challenges and trying to replace the skills quickly, because sometimes the only option is to go out and hire someone else. but we want to know, like, how difficult is that going to be? If that's going to take a year and a half because of external considerations in that job market, then that's a role that we want to have a succession plan for, because we have to be prepared for the fact that it might be vacant for a significant period of time. So then this kind of reminds me of how you score a Yahtzee. You've got the top section, the bottom section, and then you're going to get your total score. Okay, so you have to have at least 1 in the top section and at least 2 in the bottom section in order for it to be critical. So you might have roles that you think are critical off the top of your head, and then they turn out not to be critical. And this is where you're going to objectively assess that. Okay, so now we're going to carry the roles that were determined to be critical over to tab B. So let's say we've got 1. You're going to put their score in here. This is just very basic, okay? And then you're going to prioritize them based on the score. So they have to have a score of at least 3 to even make it over here. But if they have a score of 7 or 8, that's going to go to the top of your priority list, because if it's got a score of 7 or 8 on tab A, that means it's extremely critical. It's extremely difficult to replace. And we really want to be prepared and minimize the potential stress around a vacancy in that role. So far, so good? Everyone, okay.
Yes, for sure, Jennifer.
Okay, good. Christine, you'll let me know. Oh, why are my little things moving? I don't want that. Oh, something crazy went on there. Okay. All right. So the next tab is the succession plan. This is your master sheet laminated thing that you have pinned on your wall that you work off of for this entire process. I'm just showing it to you here because this is where it falls in the order of the tabs, but we're not going to work with this for the most part. This is where we collect the results of our actual gap analysis and planning. So you'll see in here at the top are the critical roles, which is really what we're going to talk about today, because I think small organizations don't, we get down into the more luxury, decadent areas of succession planning when we move to these other two. So we're just going to stick to the critical roles section to start with. If you even get a couple things filled out in here, that still counts as a succession plan. It's something, it's a start. Down in this box here, I've explained what the different titles here mean. And again, today we'll be focusing on those critical roles, the ones that you added up in the critical role list, and it's confirmed this is a critical role in my organization. I need to be thinking about what to do with this from a business continuity perspective. Okay, so we're going to skip over that and we're going to go to a gap analysis. This is where the work is done, and I've put a sample in here. So presumably I've already gone and determined that this is me. I'm the executive director and it's a critical role in the organization. I've identified that the program manager who's currently working underneath me will be a good successor. So that's what we're putting in here. This can be more than one person. Okay, so you could do a gap analysis on multiple successors, so that you build your chances of having someone ready when you need it. Again, I think that's a bit of a luxury for a small business, but just so you know, you could have multiple people that you're preparing to step up if there's a vacancy. For this example, we're just going to say it's me, this individual here. So I'm going to go to the job description of the executive director, and I'm going to rank the skills and competencies that I think are important for continuity. I'm then going to grade where is the current executive director on these skills, or what is the current level that's required to keep this job. This is the successor's current level. Where are they in strategic leadership? So this program manager, how good are they at these things? And then how good do they need to be in order to backfill this position? So this will be based on the executive director's job description, and this will be based on my ability to fill this role. You can see I've got a bit of a gap here, I've got a bit of a gap here, and I've got a little bit of a smaller gap here. These are also listed in order of priority. So when I've done this, I've decided that strategic leadership is the most important thing that I need to be able to put this person into the role, and I've got a gap there. And then we're going to rate them in terms of this scale here. So are they a beginner? Are they minimally competent, excellent, or a master? So in this one, we're looking for a master level on strategic leadership, and I have a competent level. That's not too bad. When you get up into 4s and 5s and things, these are, these are kind of nice to haves. But I would say that we've still got a gap here, and I've added these together, these readiness ratings, and just got an average. So on average, I'm about 3.33% points in terms of being ready for the role. That's not too bad. If this comes out to be a 1 or a 2, though, you've got some real work to do. So then the next thing is to develop an action plan. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to get the program, it should be manager, to participate in strategic planning sessions, get them familiarized a little bit more with what the executive director does from a strategic perspective, include them in decision-making meetings when possible, maybe get them a mentor. It could be a board member or another senior leader to discuss the strategic decision-making regularly. So I'm not going to read all of these, but and I will correct that this should say program manager before I send it over, but you get the idea here. You're just going to talk about like, okay, how are we going to move them from a 2 to a 4 or a 3 to a 5? What's the plan? And that's a great thing to have. But then it's like, okay, well, how are we going to do this? What do we need to have? What are the resources we need to execute on this action plan? A lot of times this might be people. So you might identify who the specific board member is that's going to maybe take them under their wing, or who they're going to spend time with, or specific courses that you may have to purchase. Maybe they have to spend a couple hours a quarter with a consultant. Like, what are we doing? You can put the required financial resources in order to build them up to that plan. But this is basically like, okay, great. We know what we want to do. What do we need to collect together? What do we need to organize in order to get this action plan happening? And this is really
Can I just ask a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
So I just want to make sure I understand. So the potential role, or the role that you're filling, is based on just like job description, and it's not based on the person currently doing it. It's based on the duties required to perform that.
Yes.
But when you identify the successor, you're looking at a specific person, not what their role currently is.
That's right. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
And again, it could be more than one person.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So then essentially, like, if that person leaves, you'll have to do this entire exercise again, because it's tied to a person moving in, not a role expanding.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. And again, we're trying to get them ready. And so we're literally assessing that individual's current level. So that's important. Thank you for asking a question. Okay. And then we're going to put a start date and a due date in. I would set calendar reminders around this just to make sure, because obviously this isn't going to be the most front and center priority in your organization at any given time. This is an insurance policy. It's not the sexiest, most exciting thing that's going on until it's absolutely in your face and the most exciting thing going on. So it's like an insurance. So I know it takes discipline to maintain it, and that's kind of sometimes the most challenging part. But I would just set timelines and dates around making sure you check in, just to get in the habit of maintaining it, because again, it's not going to be as helpful if it hasn't been looked at in the last 18 months. And to your question, Bryn, maybe that person's now left, or who knows what else might have happened, or additional skills may have come into play. So there's a start date and a due date. And then this is just the order of priority that you need to tackle these things. If you've got limited bandwidth, maybe this program manager is part-time, it's going to take years for us to get to this. And as I stated at the beginning, I've already put mine in priority order, but if you want to rank them using this numbering here, you can do that as well. And then we make a note about little barriers that might come up with the resources or the action plan. We don't want to be naive about doing this. We want it to be very practical. Are there things that are kind of gonna create additional barriers to getting this done? We make note of them and we try to figure out how we can address them. So I think that is the end of the gap analysis. So for every potential successor, we're going to analyze their gaps in this way. And then And you'll see I've created two. I have to look over my thing to see my big monitor here, but I've created two blank ones that you can fill out when you get the template for the roles that you might identify as critical. And then what you do is you just put the information over here into your spreadsheet. This is your at a glance succession plan. So all of this will be filled out. So this is again the role, basically the what, not a person, when we expect it to be vacant. But for critical roles, to be honest, usually we don't know, but they might be critical and also retiring. So you can put their retirement date in here. I usually link out to the job description that we used as a basis to do the gap analysis. We put who's in the role currently, just for reference. The reason that they might be leaving, if they are, usually, you would hopefully not be planning a dismissal around a critical role, but you never know. And long-term absence is pretty difficult to predict unless they've got surgery or something booked. But anyway, you can select the reason, put in who you think the successor is going to be. They're going to have a gap analysis sheet down at the bottom here. This is a little something extra. I don't know if you're familiar with 9-box or not. You can take it out. This is like a high potential determination exercise and sort of goes back to that adaptability and long-term potential when I talked about how to pick potential successors. So if you do have some kind of high potential matrix or anything in your organization, which I think is probably pretty unlikely with really small organizations, you can put that in here just as an additional deciding factor. And then we try to predict, like, is this going to take me 3 years to get this person to where I need them to be? Is it going to be very short term? Like they're almost all the way there. We can bang this off in 3 months, just get a kind of an idea of how their overall readiness, the job that they're currently in, just as a means of tracking where they would be coming from. If they have any plans to retire, this is really getting quite far down the road. You could actually not do this unless you've got sort of only one successor and they're going to be leaving 2 years after that. That's like a really kind of extreme situation. So I don't know, you could delete this column if you don't want to go that deep into it. Then we're just going to note here, is their gap analysis completed? Yes. So that's the other sheet that we just filled out. Yes, it's done. And then what was their overall readiness rating? And then, we can put in here if there's specific training required, but most of this information is really kept on the gap analysis sheet for the individual successors. And let me just see what else is on this one, if I've missed anything. Oh yeah, sort of what, if there's a specific training plan where they're going for education, like in HR, maybe you're going to get them their HR certificate or something, when does that start? So you don't have to use all of these columns. I probably could have removed a few of these just to make it simpler, but I decided to leave them in just in case it's something that appeals to you or you want to manage this, customize it in a way that works best for your organization. But that's essentially it. So you're going to fill this out. I have done this with organizations where we've had, like in software development and things, where there's a lot of critical roles because people tend to own a piece of something that's highly technical. It's very institutional knowledge based. They've been there building the tool from the ground up. Understandably, they just have a tremendous amount of information in their head that can't be easily duplicated in another person. And it usually takes about 90 minutes to do the gap analysis. So that's not too bad. It's not as overwhelming as it seems, I think, when you first look at this or think about all of these things. And again, if you're a really small organization, I would literally just sort of replace the word roles with projects or skills that you need to develop within the organization. If it's not going to be a one-to-one replacement or you don't have the pool, the luxurious pool of people to pick from, you can kind of just do this around a project-based or a really critical task-based method. But I've done it here the way most organizations would do it, which is around, one person or maybe two being built up to take one critical role within the organization. Okay, so I'm going to close. Does anyone have any questions about the template? Any other questions? Okay. So I'm hoping, can you all see my presentation again now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I wasn't sure how that would work. All right, so no questions at all about what I've discussed so far or the sample or using the template or anything? Okay, wow, good. Okay. All right. So, did I do that? Oopsie. I just want to make sure I
I
didn't skip
think
ahead.
I think Lori's trying to ask a question, but we can't hear her. She just
Oh,
came on. You probably can't see her because your presentation's up, but her video is
no, I
on and
can
I
see
can
her,
see her
Lori.
mouth moving.
She's talking. Do you want to type it in the chat, Lori, just real quick? We got lots of extra time, so we'll wait. We're good. So what conversations would you have with two potential successors? Like in terms of do you think they're going to be competitive about who gets it, or one thinks they're more suited to the other? Just give me a little bit more context. I'm an HR person here. I hate to make assumptions about what what we're really talking about. Yeah, so I think what you're getting at is there's sort of two people potentially vying for the promotion of moving into this other role at some point in their career. And it's like, well, if I start planning with both of them, is that going to create issues? So I think it's what I would try to do is move it away from the idea of like who's going to get the job under ideal circumstances and just really frame it around business continuity. Because this is different. This isn't, we're not even going to post the role and not everyone can apply if the ED role becomes vacant. That's recruitment and talent. That's something completely different. This is about business continuity. And it also could be for a short-term unplanned absence. So if it was your role, Lori, maybe you're just going to be off for 8 weeks with a shoulder surgery. This plan still needs to work for that instance. So I would just really try not to frame it around like who's going to become the natural successor in a promotion sense, but around what's important for the organization's business continuity. I would try to split it up if I could, just to make it really sort of fair. If you genuinely think that it could be either person, just try to divide the tasks. Do it in a way that seems unbiased and that we're doing it literally about what fits best where from a very practical perspective. Try to keep, personalities and individual unicorn skills out of it. Just stick to the facts. And then I think if a little bit of insecurity or competitiveness bubbles up with these potential successors, I would just again reframe it. This is a business continuity exercise. It's not about, what will happen if I leave the role expectedly and then we run a recruitment to try to replace it. This is about emergency critical planning so that if something happens unexpected, I know who's going to hop up and take those tasks while I'm not able to do them. Does that help?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. I changed my setting.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, I guess it does help. But what I was thinking is it would be for a successor for an executive director role. And, given that there's a couple of people that are interested, it's going through this process so that it's very open and transparent. And in the end, I think, would it be best if I divert to the board to make the final decision if it's people that I've worked with for a long time?
Yeah, so we're like that's more of like a leadership development side of the
Yeah, yeah.
equation, whereas this is just like if Lori wins the lottery tomorrow, who's going to step up and do
Well, I'll
what?
keep buying tickets for sure.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't we all? None of us would be here today.
I
So
see what you mean. You're focusing on a different,
yeah,
you're
I think,
focusing today on a different area.
yeah, but I think it's a good question though, because I think you got to keep them separate.
Yeah,
There's nothing about this plan and the logistics and practicality of dividing things up in case there's an emergency that prevents you from, in another facet, you know, in your one-on-one meetings, really preparing the person that you think is the best person to step up as a leader.
yeah,
So,
yep,
which we do anyway, you know, when we have private conversations or one-on-ones with our team, we have a sense of where they're going. We have a sense of what their potential is. If there's been a 9 box done, they don't necessarily know where they fell. That's a secret leadership exercise that's done. You don't tell people they're a 1 in the 9 box, you know,
yeah,
and so you still have your own ideas, you know, hopefully very unbiased and whatever. And to your point, you know, you could bring in an external. I think what I'm about to recommend is sometimes it's best to call an HR consultant and get an
yeah,
objective third party
exactly.
in to
Yeah,
evaluate some of these things so that it does seem just more fair and
yeah,
unbiased. But there's nothing
yeah,
in a succession plan where like Lori won the lottery on Friday and geez, she's not even returning our call. Like she never even brought a cake. And you've got, you know, your marching orders to keep the
yeah,
business going is different than your own career trajectory that you might be working on over here.
yeah, yeah.
Does that
And
help?
thank you. I really appreciate the template. It really gives some structure to your thinking. So
Yeah. Okay,
that's really
great. And
good.
we'll be sending that off shortly. Although now I realize I have a few corrections to make in it. So I'm going to try to make it perfect before I send it over, obviously.
But that's
Okay,
helpful. Thank you.
yeah. Okay. So it's like you set me up for my next slide, Lori, because it's like, when do you need to have a bit of more of a conversation around this process because you're getting a little bogged down or you're not sure how to handle certain things? You know, you can call an HR consultant. Legitimately, this isn't like a huge push for my business, but sometimes it is really tough to do this on your own when you're really close to the organization. I don't know if any of you have ever gone through like a role clarity exercise or anything like that. It's just tough. It's tough. It takes a lot of time. And sometimes you need someone to come in where they have one job in the organization. They're not going to get pulled away to other things. They're not going to lose focus on what the end result needs to be. It's just helpful sometimes. So if you need some strategic guidance on how to get this done in terms of the broader business goals, if you want unbiased insights on what roles are critical, because sometimes we might have our own little biases going like, well, I think my job's really critical because I mean, they'd all die if I wasn't here, you know, like sometimes that can happen. If you're unsure how to address certain skill gaps and you need another set of eyes on how you might creatively do that with a limited budget or limited resources, establishing a framework. I'm giving you that today. So in this case, this doesn't really apply, hopefully, unless you want something different. And then just to make sure that everything's compliant and done under best practices. Is chance recording, sending a, okay, so we're good on the recording stuff. Okay, so thanks again, Lori, for the question. It's very helpful. All right. So we've gotten through this in a lot of time. Last time I did my thing, I had way too much content for the amount of time we had. And today it seems like it's going to be shorter, but again, I'll open it up for questions in a minute if you have any. The key takeaways here is that having any plan is far better than having none at all. My big message today is please just do a little bit of this, you know, so that you're somewhat prepared for if something happens. Even a basic outline provides direction, reduces uncertainty, and ensures that key roles are considered for continuity. If this is something that keeps you awake at night at all, then that's too much. And you can probably put pen to paper, figuratively speaking, and get rid of some of that just overarching cloud of anxiety around this issue. Having a few little things in place can really make a huge difference in your confidence to be able to deal with unexpected things that might occur. And, you know, again, just any progress is progress. Even if you can only look at it once a year, it's still better than having nothing. I'm always happy to help if anyone thinks they need external help in completing it. And then, you know, just start small. You can even start project or task based if it's not really, if you don't have the luxury of being able to plan around full roles. You can always prioritize it. You don't have to complete the entire thing at once. You can do it just even for one role or project. Again, better than having nothing. And then just be really proactive and make a date with yourself to regularly check in on it and make sure you're progressing with it. One thing I didn't talk a lot about today is, sort of to Lori's point, what about individual developments? Because obviously, while it is a very practical and pragmatic exercise to deal with a specific type of emergency, these people that are identified as successors are growing through this process. So it can also form part of their individual development plans if they're really keen. So it's the benefits can be twofold. So if you have a really ambitious person in your organization who's always like, give me more, give me more, give me more, I want to be more involved, then this can kind of solve that for you too, by providing them with a little bit of something, to dig their teeth into in terms of progressing their career. As you work through the plan, they're obviously going to be building skills and things that will help their resume. It makes them feel more involved. If you have a high potential person where it's like, well, you're not going to be promoted because I'm going to be here for another 15 years, but we can at least, start doing some skill building, get you some variety of tasks and projects, get you maybe a little bit more involved in some of the strategic stuff that goes on, and just basically enrich your employee experience as part of this process.
Lori, Jennifer.
Yes.
Jennifer, circling back to what I said earlier, would you highly recommend for the smaller organizations of like, say, 2 or 3 people, of proactively taking this to their board and saying, we have to do this?
Yeah.
Because I feel like maybe it's a missed step or a missed thing that people rarely think of, like you said, until they need it. And then we've got issues, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you want to be mean, just go in and tell the board that you've won the lottery and then say, okay, so what's your plan? Because you don't have to be that mean about it. I've done that with clients. So I've been like, okay, so, your lead software engineer, which basically a couple of years ago during COVID, if you wanted to hire a software engineer, you had to give birth to them, raise them to 18, send them to school, and then hope that they wanted to work with you. That was the plan. Okay. And so I'm like, okay, they're gone. And color just drains out of their face. Like, what do you mean they're gone? Well, they're just gone. Their passwords are gone. Everything they had in their head is gone. You're going to have to dig through every file on their computer to find what it is you're looking for. Like, they're just gone. What do you do? And they turn gray. It's a horrible, because we all operate as though everything's going to be fine, which is a part of human nature, which keeps us wake up smiling every day, hopefully. So, it's just, but it happens. Unexpected things happen. Okay. And I've taken out all the really doom and gloom examples of what can happen, and I've chosen to focus on winning the lottery. But you see what I'm saying? Like, a lot of these things aren't planned for. My mother, for example, my mother was one of those people who won the no sick time award. For like 35 years, she worked in the hospital system. She had not missed a day. Not a day. And then in 1 year, she needed 2 major orthopedic surgeries. She was gone for 6 months between the 2 of those. And so, it's just could be something simple like that. And if your board realizes that they should acknowledge that if some of these key roles disappear, they're just going to have to jump in and put this together with bubble gum and toothpicks. It's going to be very stressful for everyone involved. And I think boards are already kind of stressed around here. They're very busy. They all have other things. They're volunteer most of the time. And so I think that I would absolutely just even, you can send them this recording, or just give them like, hey, listen, we have people that rely on us. We're obviously a service that's essential to some people, or we wouldn't exist. And so if everything just stopped and we had no plan at all, and it took us weeks to recalibrate and try to figure out how we're going to do even the basic things, that's obviously very detrimental to everyone attached to the organization.
And several organizations within our membership come to mind that I know their top person, their key person, if something happened to them, things would definitely go sideways quickly.
Yeah, and the other thing is that the board has the influence to try to minimize the defensiveness of that person that you're talking about replacing. Because you don't, I don't mean to like overemphasize this, but people can get a little defensive and territorial around the stuff that only they know how to do. And I get it. It's not a super healthy way to think, because it really is, the organization does need to survive beyond you. And I think even the people who maybe have a little bit of that territorial mindset, even in spite of themselves, do actually want the organization to succeed if something happens to them, because they're obviously attached to their mission and mandate, and they understand the importance of it in the community. And so I think that a board involvement, and again, like I've talked a few times in the presentation about a communication plan and involving everybody and making sure everybody buys in, that's a really important first step, or you're going to be sort of swimming upstream a little bit trying to get it done. And so I think, yeah, if the board buys into it, that will help with some of those objections and resistance that tends to come up.
And I think it goes back to what you said earlier. It's not about the person, it's about the role. And if that is emphasized, absolutely.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I would just say, like, listen, I have this thing laminated on my wall. I hope I never, ever have to take it down. Like, I don't want this to happen, but if it does, I don't want everyone that's tied to the organization to suffer because we haven't done our due diligence and made sure that we planned around that possibility.
Absolutely.
Like, nobody actually wants to have to use this thing, but it's better than to not have one, right? Nobody wants to use their vehicle insurance either, but we certainly all have it. But they had to make it the law because probably lots of people wouldn't if they could get away with it, right? Because it's expensive. All right. So any questions at all before we head off? We've spent an hour. That's not too bad, but we did have an additional half an hour booked, and I'm happy to stay on if anyone has any questions or specific issues that they want to work through that they can already see cropping up as they go back and try to make this work in their organization. Appreciate all the thanks. Thank you. All right. Well, if there aren't any questions, I'm sure you have my contact info one way or another, or I'll make sure that Christine sends it out. I'm happy to take the odd email or whatever if you need clarification on anything. I know the spreadsheet can get a little confusing, to be honest with you. I've used it and I designed it, and I sometimes still get like, what? Why is this here? What am I carrying over? So no judgment whatsoever. If you have any questions about the tool when you get it, definitely let me or Christine know, and we'll connect and I'll help clarify it for you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I really appreciate it. Lots of excellent information for this one. And as I mentioned earlier, I will be posting the video on our YouTube channel, and I will send the link out to everybody who joined us today so they can review it, because sometimes you need to kind of process things for a little bit. And I'm sure they may have questions for you. For sure.
Yeah, and I would love to hear from anybody who's interested in talking about it more. I really love this topic. So, and thanks again for having me, Christine, and I hope we can do another one soon.
Absolutely. If you'd like to stop
Okay.
recording.
Yeah, I will. Oh, that's on me.
Thanks, everybody.
I'll just end it.